Right, okay, let's get started. For a change, I'm not going to give a technical talk. It is going to touch on the technology, but that's going to be, I won't say peripheral because it is pretty central, obviously, but that's not going to be the main focus. The main focus is, to be honest, what it's doing is it's kind of giving you an overview of kind of the state of my thinking about AI and where it is right now. And I've been working on building sort of a view on strategy as it relates to AI. So I'll start off with this, which I basically did. It's quite cool. It was Google VO3. That was about 15 lines of Python code to generate that video. It's just amazing what you can do now. Anyway, most of you probably know me. I can't actually see you, so I'm not quite sure who's here. But so I'm Ian Jempson. Grew up in Canada. I was the world's worst hockey player when I was a little kid. But I live in central London at the moment, where my company Transforming Digital is based. Really into sort of have an unfortunate fondness for German sports cars. Been working with FileMaker just about forever, since the mid-90s. I went back to school to do my MBA, and I wrote my dissertation on the strategic implications of AI and machine learning. And I finished that in 2020, and the timing was quite appropriate. So what I'm going to show you here is kind of an extension of my thinking at that time, coupled with the experience of about 5 years of writing AI code. So I've been working a lot with LLMs and AI agents lately. So the agenda, really, what we hope to get out of this is, how do we choose AI use cases that minimizes the chances of failure? So I'm not going to basically say that I'm going to give you a way to come up with AI use cases that succeed, because that's impossible. But there are certain patterns that we see that cause things to fail. And so if we know the patterns that will cause things to fail and we can avoid those, we're probably better off. So you probably all saw the kind of clickbaity headlines about a month ago about the MIT study that claimed that 95% of AI projects failed. And at the time, I had a look. I tried to find the study, but what I found were a whole load of Twitter links leading back and forth, all pointing at each other, all quoting the same headline from, I think it was the New York Times. And when I actually found the paper and read it, it was considerably more nuanced. That it's not that 95% of projects fail, but 95% of them didn't give direct business value. And they were talking about proof of concept type systems. So depending on the goals of the business, that may or may not be failure. If it's all about learning and the company learned a lot of valuable lessons, then perhaps it didn't fail. And the next thing we got last week was Wharton Business School saying, well, 75% of them, 75% succeed. Not only that, but they said that 74% generated positive ROI. And I thought, like, neither of the numbers sound very realistic. And I then found this study. Salesforce found that the C-suite, 63% of the C-suite say that their companies are data-driven and that they're all good to go on AI. But when they spoke to the data leaders in those companies, 84% of the data leaders said their data strategy needed complete overhaul and they were nowhere near ready for AI. And I thought that kind of disconnect might go some way to explain why Wharton said 75% succeed if the CEOs think that. But also that kind of disconnect is just bound to lead to a lot of problems. The next one we've got is Y Combinator, big VC firm, and they're saying that they had a YouTube post where they basically said, enterprise is bad at AI. And my counter-argument to that is Walmart. Walmart is adopting agentic AI in a really big way. They've built their own foundation models. I mean, obviously, they've got all the money in the world and all the data in the world. But they're also probably a really good example of big enterprise, and they're doing it right. So what the results they're getting is they're basically implementing this end-to-end. And they've got 5 different agents for different areas of their business. And if we look at the software one, what they found is that they're looking at accessibility compliance coding, and that their agent there was automatically identifying 60% of bugs and fixing 95% of them automatically. And they said that led them to an 8 times improvement in their coding results. So to me, that sounds like someone in the enterprise is doing it right. So there's a lot of conflicting information. And then the question is, why do AI projects fail? And there's, well, the other thing to point out is, as we all know, lots of software projects fail. And software projects are much more deterministic than AI projects. So why would AI be any different? But if we look at some of the reasons, we get sort of CEOs basically saying, let's do AI. And I'm sure you've all spoken to clients who say, I want to do AI. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know why I want to do it. I don't know how it's going to produce results, but I want to do AI. And that's not great. So that leads to unrealistic expectations. We've got a lack of understanding. And fundamentally, those organizations aren't at a maturity level in terms of AI skills where they could implement something effectively. That MIT study, again, one of the things they did find was that a lot of problems were due to the transition from the proof of concept phase to production. Basically, that the data pipelines weren't there. So it's really easy to spin up a proof of concept that works. I'll show that later, my example here. That you can get a proof of concept often working really, really quickly, like in a few hours of coding, and it looks really good. But it's not production ready. There's no data pipelines to make sure that everything flows properly. It doesn't handle edge cases. And we don't have sort of the data pipelines. We then sort of have business type things where we've got a lack of alignment with the organization, lack of user acceptance, and then often models just provide inaccurate results. I quite like this. Andrej Karpathy, who used to head up the AI project at Tesla to do automated driving, said that they're chasing 9s. When he was asked why is it taking so long to do automated driving, he said it took them 2 or 3 years to get to 90%. He said to get to 99% took another 2 or 3 years. To get to 99.9% was another 2 or 3 years. That essentially you can very quickly produce something that looks pretty good at first glance, but to actually get something that's really, really fully addresses every concern, it can take a long time. And in the case of automated driving, obviously you need to have a lot of 9s in terms of the reliability. 90% may be good in a high school math test, but in automated driving, that's going to lead to chaos. So if we now look at some of the use cases, I'm not going to, we've already heard a bunch of use cases here from several people, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I'm going to show you what we've got. So Google has provided a page. I'll show a QR code on the next page, the next slide, if anyone wants to get it. They've got 101 Gen AI use cases, and they've provided the technical blueprints for how to implement these in Google services. Obviously, they're trying to sell you Google services. However, it's an interesting list of use cases. So I'll keep this up here for a little bit in case anybody wants to get that. If you don't get the QR code, talk to me afterwards, and I'll share it. So what I've done for the purposes of this is I've chosen one of the use cases out of that list. And what I've chosen is a use case to write differentiated product descriptions. So the business challenge, it says, imagine you're a large e-commerce retailer. You need to generate unique, high-quality, and SEO-friendly product descriptions for thousands of items. And this can be quite a time-consuming thing, writing these descriptions. So it reduces manual effort, avoids duplicate content, and so forth. The tech stack, because I'm going to be doing it in FileMaker, we don't need to worry about. Likewise, the blueprint. But very roughly, here's what it looks like. The merchandiser inputs the product attributes. The product attributes get sent to the LLM where it runs a service, and then it returns a number of options, and then a human can review and approve. And we're going to do that in FileMaker. So our example company. Our example company is going to be a multi-sided platform. So it's going to be a two-sided platform where they sell second-hand fashion. We've got vendor partners who sell their used fashion products on the platform. And we've also got customers who shop online for products on the platform. Basically, the company facilitates transactions between the suppliers and the customers, and then the platform earns money from the transaction fees. So this is a hypothetical company, but what I did was I've got a 900,000 record data set from Kaggle. If you're not aware of it, Kaggle.com is it's a website that has a lot of training data sets for AI. So I basically found a sample data set from an existing online retailer in almost exactly that line of business. We've got 900,000 records, and that's what we're going to use as our data set. So I've converted that to FileMaker, and that's already done. But before we do that, we're going to have a quick digression. Because one of the things we want to do is we want to know, is the company getting value from the AI system that we're going to build? So if we're going to do that, we need to know how are we measuring value. And if we assume that the company's goal is to grow and earn profits, and it's doing that by earning fees through matching customers and vendors, we then need to supply a platform that enables that matching. And then the next level down is we have a whole load of things we need to do to actually implement that. So we have to host the site, we provide search services, payment services, know your customer, anti-money laundering. There's any end of individual tasks. So we can look at it saying the top level is the organization goals. The second level is the customer value proposition. What does the customer get out of this? Or in this case, we've got two sets of customers, the vendor partners and the shoppers. Below that, we've got activities. And then we've got capabilities that we have to have in order to successfully complete those activities. And some of you may recognize this as a business strategy map. And it's from Kaplan and Norton a number of years ago. And what I've done is I've adapted it somewhat to fit the needs of the model that I'm looking at. So it's got the same kind of structure, that we've got capabilities at the bottom that flow up that enable actions or activities, which then provide value to customers. And by providing value to customers, we then hopefully earn a profit. So here's a book. There's tons of information about this stuff. So it's quite a deep topic, but that's sort of the digression. So the framework. This sort of represents my current thinking about all this stuff and the state of AI. So what we're trying to do is to build a platform-agnostic strategy model that allows us to help to pick use cases or maybe reject use cases. And so it represents my current thinking as of now, November 2025. And it is platform agnostic. I know it's a FileMaker conference, or Claris conference, but this basically will work with any technology. It's not specific to FileMaker. And so the main screen, the summary screen of my framework, because I built this as a web app, which I'll be demoing in a couple of minutes. That what we've got here, in this case, you can see that this one's saying that we've got an 86% score, and it's rating this as a strong go. And you can see that we've got a spider diagram showing sort of how strong things are in the different perspectives. And I've got 5 different dimensions. I've got business value. We've got sort of quick wins, strategic alignment, data, and then capabilities. And if I show another example, this one's flagged as a no-go. And you can see that down in the bottom right, it's showing we've got two critical gaps. It's saying that we've got gaps in capabilities, we've got gaps in data. So it's recommending that basically this use case would be rejected. So the dimensions basically, yeah, we've got business value, and that kind of, I've chosen to use that sort of strategy map method as a method of measuring the business value. The reason is that if we just looked at, say, sales or profit, that doesn't link to any of, there's no direct causal link to the activities we're performing. So what we want to have is we want to have that causal link between each of the steps to assess whether things are working correctly. Quick win is quite important, and I'm going to drill down into more detail in these. Strategic alignment, does this basically match up with what the business is trying to do? So say, for example, if you were Google and somebody came up with an idea for fixing cars, you would say that's not very aligned with their organizational goals and would make no sense. Data is a really, really important one. The MIT study highlighted data as one of the major issues in the systems that failed. And then capabilities. Basically, do we have the capabilities to deliver what we need to do to make this work? So I'll do the first level drill down here. So we're looking at business value, and I've got a score of 1 to 5. And there's a more detailed view, but I'll kind of do the high-level view first, quickly. So is there a clear path from the organizational goals to the customer value, to the activities, down to our capabilities? Does this all link up correctly? And does this project support profit or core business goals? Because if you're talking about, say, a charity, for example, their core business goal isn't going to be profit. Their core business goal might be to help starving children. And they wouldn't be interested in projects that didn't support that goal. Does this actually deliver value to the customers or users? And what activities does this improve? And can we quantify this? In terms of quantifying it, actually, there's an interesting point, because the chief AI officer at Moderna, when he was asked about what's the ROI on their spend at OpenAI, said, I don't know. He said, I don't care. Do you calculate an ROI on the electricity bill? He said, no, it's a thing you have to have. And so Moderna are now viewing AI as a thing that they need to provide to all their employees to enable them to work better. So that I thought was an interesting perspective. If we move on to the next step, or next thing, we've got quick win. Can this thing actually deliver value in 3 to 6 months? Can we ship an MVP in 4 months? Because if it's going to take us 12 to 18 months to ship an MVP that see any value, the state of AI at the moment is changing so fast that it's going to be out of date before we're even done, and we'll basically have wasted a year. This also looks at external dependencies. How many people have to be involved? Do you need to coordinate 20 people's schedules to get them in a meeting to agree something? If it takes months to get people in a room to agree something, and I've been in meetings with a UK high street bank where, yeah, it would take 6 months to actually get the people in the room to discuss something. And that's just too long for this kind of project. We then also have strategic alignment, like, is this core to our business, or does it build capabilities that we can reuse for the business? And if it's a learning project, is the learning valuable? Is the learning something that we can reuse for other projects? And then, is management going to have patience for this? Is management going to wait to see the result? Because if management is completely uninterested in this, then, again, that's a complete no-go. And you probably notice that a lot of these things actually are not specific to AI, but to software projects just in general. That if you don't have management buy-in, it's going to fail, most likely. Then we come to data. In order to do this, do we know that the data exists? Because it might not. Do we understand what the data means? Because, again, so I've been doing a project for a company in finance, and they purchased another company that used FileMaker. And the new owners, they didn't understand FileMaker, so they got me in to help them understand the data and make sense of it, because they view that as being really, really important. Is the data quality sufficient for AI? I'm sure we've all seen customers where the data is just, there's duplicates, there's all kinds of errors all over the place, and AI is going to be terrible with this. If you think of AI as an amplifier for a process, if you've got a bad process, it's going to make a bad process worse really fast. If you've got a good process, it's going to make it better. Oh, and can we access the data programmatically? I mean, do we have to export to Excel and then import and then worry about Excel munging data around? There's all kinds of issues around data. And then we've got capabilities. Do we have the technical skills to build this? Can we run this in production? Will people use it? And can we keep this up long term? Is it sort of, if it's running on if it's running on somebody's laptop in the back of the marketing department and they're threatening to leave, then we probably don't want to be doing this. Okay, now comes the time. Now we come to the risky part. The live software demo. Sorry, I'm just going to have to grab my glasses. Okay, so we'll start off with the FileMaker part. Sorry, I'm just going to have to change this to mirror the screen because I can't control that well. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that confusion. Hopefully they can edit that bit out. Okay, so, right, FileMaker. I've imported the data set, and we've got 900,000 records here. And what these are products. And you can see that in these products, we've got varying qualities of descriptions. Some descriptions are reasonably good. Others are pretty close to useless. The use case is what we're going to do is basically going to ask an LLM to improve the product description. So we've got a prompt that describes what we want in terms of a description. And then we're going to do that. So if I take this particular one, we can choose the model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the Gemma 3 1B model, which is a tiny model. This is all running locally on my laptop, so some of the things may take a second. We check the description, and it's updated the description. So it's given a better description, and it's also explained why it gave that description. And with different models, we're going to get different qualities of description. So in terms of what I was saying about prototypes, this took almost no time to build. What we've got is a couple of FileMaker scripts that look like this. We basically set our product data, we set the prompt, we call a script that runs OLlama. We use insert from URL to talk to OLlama locally. We get the result, and it's that simple. And my first thinking when I did this was like, OK, great, this is going to be super easy. And then when I was doing a really quick run-through of the presentation with my wife, she took one look at the description and said, I stopped reading after 2 words. Said, that description is useless. Said, that description is worse than the one that came before. And she said that this is a fashion database. It missed almost all the important attributes of the product, and it didn't use any fashion-specific terms. So this is probably an example where that initial use case looked at it. The project will be considerably more complex because either we need to use a much larger model, or, and more probably, what we need to do is to fine-tune a model using the specific language for fashion. And fine-tuning a model is a totally different kind of project. It's not like a traditional software project at all. It's more akin to a research project, where we end up in a situation where we need to curate a lot of good, high-quality data. Once that data is curated, we then need to train the model. We need to learn how to use evals, which several other people have talked about, evaluating what's the quality of the results to match that up. And then we basically do a research project to find out which fine-tuning parameters make this model good. So this project has gone from being like a day to implement that very, very simple version to we're now probably talking several weeks of work. Curating the data is going to be a big, big project in itself, and then evaluating. So I found that quite interesting, and actually I did tell her that that was actually a fairly good thing from the perspective of the demo and the presentation, because it gave, if I'd gone ahead with the initial thing that looked like good descriptions to me, something like this, if we'd gone live with something like that, it's hypothetical, but it would have failed because it would have produced poor quality descriptions that wouldn't have achieved our goals. And again, that's down to the data. So that I found quite interesting. What we're doing, actually, I'll show you the prompt. What I've done is I've created the prompt as a custom function. If Christian was here, I would suggest that actually having the plus signs to enlarge the text in the function box would be nice as well. But you can see what we're doing. We're providing the input to the prompt. We've got input of a number. We're telling it what the input looks like. We're providing instructions on how to evaluate the quality. And to be honest, this prompt was a fairly quick one to come up with. It didn't require a lot of work. In a production system, what we'd actually do would be to do a lot more testing on the quality of the prompt. We would probably use a Python tool called DSPy to iterate and test and automatically evaluate and improve the prompt. And when we ended up with a prompt, we'd stick that prompt into version control, so we didn't end up with any issues. Okay, so that shows what we're trying to do, and it looks like initially like a fairly small thing. And if we now move on to the framework, okay, you can see that this case we've entered the description for the use case, check and improve, the product descriptions. It's coming out with a 60% rating. And that is because the quick win value has not been filled in. So that's a bug in my web app. So we've got the 5 dimensions. And if I drill down into the business value one, we can either just sort of select it like this off the list 1 to 5, and that's a fairly simple way of doing it. But what we've also got is if we go into view the details, we've got the 5 sections. So we've got the organizational goals, where we input some text. What are the organizational goals? We want to include that this is going to increase our sales, therefore improve profits by 10% within the next year. We expect, and we describe why we think the better descriptions will help. On our next level, okay, well, how is that going to help the customer? And we're saying that our vendor partners will see increased revenue. So if our vendor partners see increased revenue, then we should see increased revenue from the increased transaction fees. But we should also acquire new vendor partners because word gets out and so forth. And what activities do we need to do at that third level from our strategy map? So what we're saying is that users currently input the products. AI improvements are going to automatically generate descriptions according to best practices. And then at the bottom level, we've got what actual capabilities do we need to do this? We need to host an AI model. And then we're saying we plan to acquire a Mac Mini Pro to host Olama and use which model and to generate the descriptions. And from that, we've then handed that off to an LLM to do a bit of analysis. Actually, at the moment, that analysis was done locally with a Gemma 8B model running off my Mac. And you can see it's come back with the strengths. So it's got clear link between the capabilities and activities, but the gaps. So we're focused on the vendor partner's time savings, not the end customer's experience. So that doesn't give us a link between the sales and profit growth. So our assumptions, we're assuming it's going to save 2 minutes but we've not justified that in any way. And we've also not justified our estimate of 900,000 products a year. So it's given it a score of 3 out of 5 because there's some missing links there. So that tackles one of the dimensions. The next one, if we look at, is quick win. And again, we've done the same thing, that you can either tick the boxes at the top level, or we're looking at or a number of different items. So we've got a time to first value, and we can sort of score that. So if the time to first value, when we actually get the MVP producing something, is less than 4 weeks, that's pretty good. On the way down to, if it's over 6 months, that's probably too long. So essentially the questions are, can we launch an MVP really, really quickly? And I'm not saying this is the only way to do that, but these are questions that people probably should be thinking about, even if they measure value differently or use a slightly different framework. Then we've got our implementation complexity. Have we already got existing APIs we can just plug into? If so, that's really good. Is it light integration? Or is it a research project? Has nobody ever done this before? Then it's going to take a long time. We've got external dependencies, ranging from, is this self-contained? Do we have 1 or 2 dependencies externally? Or do we have, cross-organization dependencies? Like I said, when we had our meetings with the bank, and it was tremendously difficult to get everybody into the same room to talk about anything. And then with the MVP, actually, a perfect MVP might deliver 80% of the value. And then at the other end of things, we might have like an MVP that either works or just doesn't work at all. So it's all kind of selecting things. And you can see that what we're doing is we're updating the scores. So if the MVP must be complete to be useful, then that's sort of lowest score. And then technology maturity. Is this cutting edge stuff or not? So we're dealing with mature APIs. So at this point, a lot of the APIs we're talking to at OpenAI or Anthropic are actually pretty mature. A couple of years ago, that wasn't the case. They were changing fairly regularly. And I remember 2 or 3 years ago writing a lot of code using LangChain that basically was out of date in 3 months because they changed all the APIs. So that's another important consideration. And then what size of team do we need? If it's 1 or 2 people, that's sort of best, because the more people we've got, the more difficult it is to coordinate. And more than 12 people, well, if you think about what Jeff Bezos said about developing with 2 pizza teams, that basically if you couldn't feed the team with 2 pizzas, then there's probably too many people. The team is too big. It's too difficult to coordinate. And so, I mean, we've got some red flags listed. Sort of, do we need to hire AI specialists? Do we need a full-time dedicated team? Do we need consultants or external expertise? Versus, can the existing team, do they have the skills to do this already? So, and then what we're saying is sort of a true quick win gets, we're getting value in less than 3 months. It's relatively low complexity, so forth. So this is, I'll run through the other parts as well. So in this case, we're saying that it's misaligned. And I sort of coined the term that I've referred to as the management patience budget, which basically describes how likely is senior management to be patient while this goes on. If it's very aligned with the business, the senior management is much more likely to be patient while things worked on. So how directly does this tie into what the business does? That if it's a core business driver, i.e. this project or use case ties directly into something that produces revenue or value creation, then that's highly aligned with the business, and that's what you want, really, ideally. Supporting functions, does it support core operations on down through things that are unrelated to the core business? They're not well aligned. Management is going to have no patience for them, and they're not necessarily going to be, they're probably less likely to fail. If we don't have management support, these things are not going to work. Okay, if it's not directly tied to what the business is doing, is it something that we're building a capability that we'll be able to use in the future? So if we're learning about LLMs, in general, that's going to be helpful in the future on other projects. Whereas if it's something that's highly specific, single use, then that's much less, building much less in the way of strategic capability. And what are we learning? How much are we learning? Is the stuff we're learning, is it critical? Is it really important? Or is there no value? So if it's critical learning, that we need to know about LLMs for the future, that's great. And then on the management side, if the CEO views this as a priority, it's, we've got strong management alignment and support. On the other hand, if we've got management who's opposed to the project, then again, it's much more likely to fail. So it's all kind of a continuum from good to bad. And these aren't the only sort of things, but these are the dimensions that I've been thinking about. And then in terms of competitive necessity, is this something that we have to compete? Or is it something that's totally irrelevant to competing? Again, continuum from one to the other. And then how does this fit in with other projects? How does it fit in with the portfolio of software projects we're building? And if it's a perfect fit, that's obviously good. And then what we're doing is we're kind of calculating those scores up, saying that we've got core alignment of and you can see actually the updating here is not quite working correctly. So that's what you get for building software really quickly on the go. Anyway, data is a really important one. And so is the data available? So if we confirm the data is there, and is it ready? Is it in accessible format? Or is it something that already exists but we need to extract it? Or is it partially available? Or is it kind of all over the place in a load of Excel files and text files? And one interesting thing here is that Now that Claude Desktop is available, widely available, and OpenAI and those tools, is that some organizations, some software as a service vendors are starting to lock down the data and make it more difficult for people to access the data and charging for APIs because they want you to use their AI models rather than extracting the data and using your AI model or Anthropic or OpenAI. So I think Andrew Ng mentioned recently on one of his talks that he'd seen an organization that was basically a software as a service vendor had announced they were going to charge $20,000 to give them an API key just to access their own data in the system because they didn't want the data being extracted for use elsewhere. Because this type of thing is actually turning into an existential problem for a lot of software as a service vendors. If you saw Wim's session on MCP, if Claude running MCP on the desktop is basically querying, if that's where all the logic is, what are some of these software as a service systems doing? They're basically now functioning just as a holding place for data that's extracted and the values being accrued on the desktop in Claude. So that can be a big threat for some of the software vendors. And we're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing happening. Do we understand the data? Sort of mystery data is the worst, whereas if it's fully documented, complete data dictionary, and all the experts have validated it, then that's great. We're good. And data quality. Yeah, so as FileMaker developers, we've all seen clients who've got data that's a complete mess, where you look at the customer database, you've got duplicates all over the place, addresses are entered 5 different ways. That kind of data is going to be terrible for any AI system, and it's going to produce poorer results. Data accessibility. We've kind of ranked that from full API access at the top with direct database via SQL, next, scheduled exports, manual exports, or stuck in legacy systems being the worst. And the data volume. If we're looking at fine-tuning a model, do we have enough data to fine-tune a model? Basically, ideally, you want to have 100,000 plus records. And when we looked at, say, Walmart and what Walmart did, Walmart, having all the resources, basically built their own LLM because they've got all the data they need, they understand the data. If you've got less than 100 records, you're not going to be able to fine-tune a model to meet your needs. Likewise, 1,000 records is kind of borderline. You may be able to get away with it, but you really do need more than that, ideally. And then, again, this is if you're fine-tuning, do we understand, is the data labeled? Is it accurately labeled? And privacy and compliance. If you're a medical office, are you able to send your data to OpenAI? Well, actually, if you pay OpenAI a load of money and get the HIPAA-compliant version, then yes, you can, but that's probably going to cost you a lot more money. Then again, we've got a lot of legislation around AI now. Basically, do we have a legal basis for processing this data? If we don't, then it could be viewed as being a toxic data, and we don't want that. So these are some of the issues around data. And then we come to things like the capabilities, where essentially we need to, if we break it into 3 sections, we need to build the system, we need to run the system, and will people actually use it? And this can break down further into several areas. So we've got our technical capabilities. Do you have an experienced AI team in-house? Can you run a model server? Are the developers familiar? Or is everybody trying this for the first time? If we look at operational capabilities, we're talking about do we have the DevOps in place to effectively run a system, monitor it? And again, evaluations come in here. And we're starting to see frameworks like Langsmith that allow you to operate and monitor models. And if there's no ops, then that's kind of the worst score. Change management is super important here. Basically, do you have strong change management or none? And again, but that's the same as any software project. With strong change management, things are much, much easier. With no change management, let's say, for example, if you've got user pushback and that's not managed, then things are going to be quite difficult. And that kind of ties in with the skills and training. Is there a comprehensive plan for training for users, or is it a matter of just giving them a PDF saying, read this, and letting them have at it, which is a recipe for failure? And then, yeah, is the organization ready? So we can use things like the technology adoption model to assess whether the organization is ready and what people's attitudes are towards adopting AI and change. And then can we support this long term? What happens when the initial team moves on? The place where I worked before as a software architect, essentially, if you built a small system on your own, essentially you were signing up to look after it and maintain it until you basically were able to hand it off to somebody else. You weren't allowed to put a system into production with no plan for who's going to look after it and who do you call when things go wrong. So that kind of gives you, that gives you an overview of what I've been thinking about in terms of a framework for how you validate use cases. Frankly, it could be viewed as a list of things that are red flags. That if you don't have the data, or the data is really poor quality, think twice before going ahead. If the CEO says implement AI, but there's no clear plan or strategy or alignment, don't do it. Likewise, if the CEO is hostile, don't do it. So there's a number of things we can do to try to minimize the risks. And if I go back there, so we've done that. And I actually had a few slides in case the demo failed, which basically run through those parts. So I'll just skip quickly through those. This is, the assessment that I got from the value chain analysis. Capabilities. I wanted to touch on capabilities because these are some of the capabilities. From attending the sessions here, a lot of those would have been covered. But to implement systems, we need to have prompt engineering skills. We need to understand evaluations. We need to look at how do we host LLM models. So you've got three options fundamentally. You've got the cloud, Anthropic, OpenAI. You've got sort of cloud, but under our control with Bedrock, Azure, Google. You can do it locally. The software side, you've got things like LM Studio, Olama, Open Web UI, Light LLM. Light LLM can function as a proxy for other services, but it can also provide statistics if you run it locally, so that's quite handy. And then hardware, you need to have GPUs. And one of the things is, architecturally, if you look at FileMaker systems, if you've got an office full of Macs, you've got GPUs everywhere, except for the one computer that FileMaker is telling you to serve the models from. The FileMaker server is probably not going to have a GPU. So if you're able to do a lot of the inference on the clients, that's good. Otherwise, you need to find another way of doing it. Those software packages are quite mature, and they're fast-moving, and they adopt changes really, really quickly. So when OpenAI came up with new models, Olama and LM Studio had new versions within 4 hours. that were capable of using the new OpenAI models. So there was no having to wait. So a software vendor who's really focused on that is something that's probably a good idea. Fine-tuning, you may or may not need to get into, but it is a totally different thing from just developing with, it requires a lot of work and different skills. You're starting to get into classic ML and statistics and data science in order to implement those kinds of things properly. So, thanks very much for listening to me lather on. Do we have any questions? And sorry, I can't actually see if there's any hands up, so. Okay. Rob.
Thanks, Ian. That is very cool. Do you weight the scores at all across the different sections? And if you do, what do you weight the highest?
That's a good question, and I'll be quite honest. At the moment, I got fairly basic weighting, where they're all pretty much equal. What I would weight highest, to be honest, I would probably be, and I've not done this in that model we've got there, but my thinking would be that the two that should be weighted the highest would be business value and data. To be honest, data kind of probably actually properly falls under the capabilities description, but I think it's so important that having it separately, spelling it out separately is a good idea. The other thing that this does not include at the moment is risks, which I think actually should be added in to make it a more complete framework, but I didn't want to end up with like a long laundry list of, it was already kind of getting that way in some of the detail areas. So, David.
So you can see some of us at least. That's good.
In the front, yes.
Yeah. So there are, maybe because of my initial attitude, but like from this conference in general, it's basically a lot of talk about AI, and generally the conclusion is mostly it's not the right option. Collaborating. Oh, sorry. So it's kind of tricky. If you want privacy, it's going to cost a lot of money for hardware.
Yeah.
So the client comes to you, you conclude AI is maybe not the best option. So what do you propose as a fallback? Let's do it with something else. Do we go back to more like old school machine learning, which is not that old school, or like, because you need, like, as a FileMaker developer, I need to propose a solution to my AI client.
Yeah.
So what do I suggest when it's not AI?
It probably depends on the nature of the problem. That some problems would lend themselves to traditional machine learning techniques, but again, that's like a different skill set from most software development. Actually, one of the people I interviewed when I wrote my dissertation was, she was the head of AI for a multi-billion-dollar platform on the web. And she said that most of the models that they built never saw the light of day. She said that she described it as a graveyard of models. Said most models, when they're built and tested and assessed, they don't work to a standard that they'd be able to deploy in the wild. So I found that quite interesting. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that.
That makes sense.
Thank you for the presentation. I think almost everything you said is true for almost every project, not only software projects, and especially not only AI projects. AI is one of the kits in the toolbox.
Yes.
And like with other things, I can do overuse, underuse, or the correct ones, and it's dependent on the situation. Usually it's not the only way to get to the goal that I have. So also integrating David's question, if you are only good at AI, if you are really good, if you can assess most of the points, why not try? if, as it is shown there, everything is new for you, same with any other project, be careful.
Yes.
It's more risky. So there is not a yes or no question.
No.
But at the moment, this AI has hype.
Yeah.
As Sarah showed, and I think we are at the moment at this steep point where everybody thinks it's good. Now, soon there will come some clearer picture and disappointment, and then suddenly it will level down to something where it's productive.
Yeah, I think one of the things we can also do there is that one of the other things that Jeff Bezos has said before is that there's two kinds of decisions in the organization. There's ones that you can easily reverse, and there's ones that are bet the company kind of decisions that are not easily reversed. So I think keeping AI projects in the learning phase, keeping the scope of them very small and focused so a failure is manageable and not going to risk the business or organization, that's good. But the other thing that suggestion is that with projects that when they start to succeed, don't just sort of widen the scope out across the organization, basically go deep in the one area where it is working and just go sort of drill deep with it where it does work, rather than diffusing the effort across a wide range of activities where it may not be quite so applicable. Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for your time.